Hey everybody, Kim here with Little Biz Resources, and today we're going to be talking about why selling on Etsy is risky, plus why you need to consider your own website sooner rather than later. So the main point of this is that Etsy does not care about sellers, right? And they may disagree with this, but this is my opinion. They do not care about sellers. So you need to know there are risks with selling on Etsy, okay? Well, there are definitely advantages to selling on Etsy, and I still encourage you to sell on Etsy. You need to prepare for some likely worst case scenarios because Etsy does not care about sellers. They really do not have any interest in making sellers happy. The entire platform is created to accommodate customers and sales to a point. I'm going to say customers more than anything. They cater to a specific audience. And yes, they should be catering more to the sellers and to selling because they are a public entity now. They're publicly traded, but Etsy has yet to make that shift to reality. So Etsy has a set of policies and they apply them the way they feel like it and will abuse their own policies for unknown reasons. And I'm going to give you an example. So let's look at an intellectual property example. So recently I received a policy violation. This is not my first time and I was never wrong. I'm still not wrong. It's absurd and completely inaccurate. In fact, they told me that I was selling a handmade item that violated their policies, and I don't sell handmade items. I sell craft supplies, which is perfectly acceptable on their platform. And the person, Gladys, decided that, oh, well, it's against the policies. I'm like, well, actually, it would be if it was a handmade item, but since it's a craft supply, it's not. And so once I pointed that out, they changed their mind and switched the policy that I violated to intellectual property. And when I pointed out that it doesn't, and here's the reason why, and that there's dozens of other listings, they just replied the decision is final and that's the end. All of the other listings that are identical to mine, still on the platform. Okay. This is what I mean by they apply their policies the way they want to. It's not global. There's no rhyme or reason behind it. And their definitions are vague enough that if applied the way that they can apply it the way they want to. And an example of this would be the particular intellectual property violation that they claim. If they're going to apply it to my particular product, they would lose about 85% of their products on their marketplace if they applied it equally across the board. So that's why they're not going to do it. They're going to target the people who have no way to fight back. You know, I'm a smaller shop. I'm not huge, right? They're now catering to the big ones. Spoonflower's on there, right? They're massive, right? Look at your top 100 sellers. You're going to have big people making lots of money. They're not going to touch them because guess what? They have the money to hire a lawyer, right? So you have a huge risk being a small seller on Etsy because they don't care. There is no appeal process and Gladys is just ridiculous, right? She just applies it the way she wants to. I don't know who else is in there. The last time I got a policy violation, it was also inaccurate and the person was at least realistic and said, oh, you're right. That just got caught up in some sort of automation. In this case, it couldn't have been automation because all of the other listings would have been removed as well. And they turned around and said, look, because you have a policy violation, you're never getting star seller, which according to them is supposed to increase your sales. So I've basically eliminated my opportunity to be a decent seller on Etsy because they interpreted a policy a specific way, right? This is a risk. It doesn't matter what you're selling, right? It doesn't matter if it's handmade, if it's vintage, if it's a craft supply. It doesn't matter. You have a risk of them interpreting a policy the way they want to. Then they also threaten that they're going to steal your money for 90 days. We could hold your payments for 90 days because of a policy violation. I don't know how that's legal because any other company does that. They have to pay interest on it, except for PayPal for some reason. But they should not be able to do that. And I have an entire rant about how they are violating their own terms of service. And the second that they inadequately apply the policy, their entire agreement is in violation. They violated their terms with the sellers, with the customers, with their stockholders, with the public. I mean, they violated everything the second they stopped following their policies and applying them across the board equally, right? So I have an entire rant about that. We'll talk about that another time. But they can shut down your account with no notice. In fact, people have complained about this a lot. And this is part of the reason why we haven't been talking about this yet, was because for the most part, when we dived into ones that we saw people complaining about, we're like, well, you're technically violating legitimate policies. And it wasn't until I received the policy violation and my sister and I were talking about, we're like, look, if they apply this the same way they applied it to me, to every account, they would lose 85% of the products on their platform or more. And that's exactly why they're not going to do it. They're going to pick and choose, and they're going to make just, oh, well, you know what? You're not making enough money. You don't make enough noise, whatever. They think that they have all the power. And because no judge out there is willing to sit there and say, look, yeah, you are violating everything that you said, right? They should be held responsible for the actions that they take. They are a public company now. They're no longer a private company, can do whatever they want. They're publicly traded. They're responsible to the public, to the stockholders, to all of the stakeholders, which includes the sellers and the customers. And if they're going to pick and choose which listings that are policy violations and have such harsh penalties for it, then they need to apply it across the board. Otherwise, they're in violation of their entire existence. So that's a Kim rant. So strategy for selling on Etsy. As a marketplace, there's a lot of potential for generating sales on Etsy. I'm going to tell you that now. If you qualify and you can sell on Etsy, there's a lot of potential. It's getting a lot harder to get on Etsy simply because Etsy's being a bunch of jerks right now. They're shutting down legitimately opened accounts for no reason. And that alone is a violation of all of their selling stuff. Oh yeah, well, this is what we're doing. This is what we say we're doing. Oh, look, you started an account. We're going to shut you down for no reason. People aren't even listing stuff and they're getting shut down. So it is getting a lot harder. You have to keep that in mind. And this is getting a lot riskier now. Etsy's just turned into some sort of weird machine that's catering to bigger companies now. So guess what? We are going to be starting our own marketplace. Not necessarily Etsy specific, but we'll be starting our own marketplace soon enough. We've got to do some testing. It'll probably take a few months, but we're getting that up and running. But if you plan on making your Etsy shop a real business, you need to capture customer information. You have to. This is a blatant, they're throwing this in your face and saying, we can do what we want, shut down your company just because we want to. So you have to think like that. You have to start protecting yourself. So you do need to do this ethically and follow Etsy rules, because they do have rules set up for this. Even if they don't follow their rules, you should. So the best way to do this is through email marketing, and that's because you do get their emails. However, I've done a video on this, so you need to make sure you follow the Etsy rules, whereas people have to have a double opt-in. So you get to send them an initial invite in the first place, right? So that's a huge thing. You can't do that on Amazon. You can't do that on a lot of other platforms, but you can do that with Etsy's customers because they're your customers too, right? So because of that, I do recommend while it's available, you do that. Then you have your customers and you can direct them to another place to purchase if you need to. Or you can even just ramp up your sales on Etsy, and then you have their customer data and they've agreed to get emails from you, and you can push them to other places. Not necessarily another place you're selling if you're not selling on there already, but you could send them to, hey, check out our Facebook page, check out this. Hey, do you want to download our app and get special deals, stuff like that. So that's a good start for those who don't want to. However, I do recommend you need your own website. Eventually, you need to have your own website, and this needs to be sooner rather than later. Shopify is nice, but I'm going to say that following the shutdown of pretty much any shop that had Trump memorabilia in it, I'm going to have to argue that it's still risky, that Shopify is still risky. But I will say in a minute that you could still use this depending on what you're selling. I recommend, though, if you have a lot of products, that you ultimately consider something like WooCommerce on WordPress. And the reason why is because it's self-hosted. So there's tons of hosting companies out there. And if your hosting company decides that they don't like what you're selling, and I'm saying, look, there are some things that you shouldn't sell on these hosting places, right? They don't want inappropriate products. So I'm talking about products that are legitimate, that are not illegal to sell in the first place or anything else, right? Or are unethical or anything else. I'm talking about the 90% of the people that are trying to survive and being tagged for things that are wrong. If your hosting company says, hey, you know what, you're selling Trump memorabilia and we want to shut you down, you can go to another hosting company that doesn't care, right? And some hosting companies, they say, like Shopify claimed they never cared, they were never going to do that because it was a violation of freedom of speech, and yet they did it, right? So it's one of those, you just never know. But Shopify is, you can't like export your entire site and then load it somewhere else because it's the Shopify platform. So it's their hosting, their platform, their everything. Whereas if you're on WordPress is, you can download it, you can install WordPress on another hosting, you can you can upload your backup, and you're good to go in a couple of hours, if that, right? So that's what makes it, I like that. And I keep going back to this going, you know what? I know WooCommerce is a little bit harder to get started with than Shopify, it's not that much harder. It's a little bit more, but it's ultimately your best option for long-term success. Yes, right. So your longevity of your business, if you're like, hey, and the thing is, you never know what they're going to, I mean, look at me. I mean, I sold something that should have been legitimately sold on Etsy, and Etsy decided it's a policy violation. So if Etsy can willy-nilly do that, and Shopify can willy-nilly say, look, we're going to shut down accounts because we don't like what you're selling, and they didn't say that beforehand, you have that risk anywhere, right? So the best platform then for that would be something like WordPress, where you can, there's no restrictions on using WordPress, right? You can use WordPress. You can load it up to your own hosting. You can, WooCommerce is a plugin that goes into it, and you can have your own site running. Plus, WooCommerce integrates with a lot of options, right? Including Printful for those of you who are in our print on demand series. And if you're not, and you're like, hey, I want to do print on demand, we'll have a link in the description so you can check that out. But if you don't have a lot of products, a lot of different products, then stress less. Right? I have over 1,000, well, that's a little under 1,000 because I haven't listed some stuff on there lately, but like over 1,000 products that I'm selling on Etsy, right? And so it's like, that's hard to have to start up again. But if you don't have a whole lot of products, even 10, 20 or whatever, you could use just about anything. You could use Shopify. You could use Appomize that we've talked about. It's an app and a website together. Right? You could use a Facebook shop. As long as you can set up another site easy, you don't have, you keep all your information, you can just copy and paste it pretty quick, then you can go pretty much anywhere you want. But you should definitely have a second location at this point, right? If you are trying to sell on Etsy and you want to make it a real business, you need to plan on a second location at some point, because it's just a matter of time before Etsy decides that they're not going to cater to small businesses at all, and we're all kicked off for various reasons. Right? I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. They get to apply their policies for how they want to, and it's not even across the board. So in this case, because Etsy's doing this, this is a known fact at this point. And I know there's some of you out there that are going to claim, well, Etsy says that you can't do a class action lawsuit because they said that you agree to arbitration. I'm going to tell you now that they violate their own agreement, their terms, when they do not apply the policy across the board. Okay. So if they're violating it, I'm no longer held to arbitration, and guess what? We can't have a class action lawsuit. So those of you who have been screwed by Etsy, feel free to, reach out. You can leave comments here on this video or whatever. In fact, let's go to the next one. If you want more info on setting up a WooCommerce website too, let me know in the comments, because I don't know if there's a lot of interest in that. There are some videos out there. We are eventually going to do one that integrates with Printful. I just don't know when. So if there's interest, I will do it sooner rather than later. And of course, if you don't know what to sell, we have an entire series on print on demand. And it does, you can integrate it with Etsy, you can integrate with Shopify, you can integrate with WooCommerce, etc. And then you can ask questions here in this video in our Facebook group or come live on Thursdays. In fact, I'd encourage you, if you are somebody who's been having problems on Etsy, legitimately having problems like we did, hop into our Facebook group. Let us know, because we are opening our own marketplace. We're trying to set it up now and get it going. It's going to be a WooCommerce type one. So we'll see how well it works. But yeah, we've got it already on hosting. We've got it going. We just have to, I've got to get all the pieces together. So if you have questions, post them below, come into the Facebook group and ask questions, and or you can come live on Thursdays here on YouTube. And I appreciate you watching.